It is the grand strategy of the communists to subvert not only other countries in Africa, but the southern tip of Africa. I don't know what the so-called Western and free world will do under those circumstances, but I know what South Africans, Afrikaans and English speakers will do, small as we are. And with what we've got, we will defend this country to the last man, because we will not only
It took months, but the government finally crushed the uprising. By the end of it, hundreds were dead and thousands were wounded. International opinion was now solidly against the National Party government. Before the uprising, sympathizing with South Africa was considered controversial, but after it became downright unthinkable. Before the events of June 16th, apartheid looked like it would never end. The resistance movements had been beaten and exiled out of the country by the mid-1960s. There was very little domestic opposition to the National Party, as the ANC and PAC's armed wings failed to become serious threats, as their armed struggle was quickly diminished by a lack of recruits and domestic support. By the early 1970s, the real movements that had strengthened South Africa were the BCM, the Black Conscious Movement, and the Zulu Cultural Organization in Carter. Contrary to popular belief, it was not the ANC that initiated the Soweto Uprising, but it was actually the BCM. From June 1976, the BCM and the 19 organizations that fell under its umbrella were engaged in a hopeless struggle for the rest of the year. By 1977, over 600 people were dead, 4,000 were injured, and 6,000 were imprisoned. The apartheid government, for the rest of the year, would undertake a massive crackdown against the BCM. Its activists were hunted down, and its local structures were decimated. And on the 12th of September, 1977, Steve Biko, the leader of the Black Conscious Movement, was arrested and was beaten to death by police. 1 month later, on the 19th of October, on a day now known as Black Wednesday, the BCM and the 19 organizations under its banner were all banned. Once again, the domestic opposition to apartheid had been crushed. To take an honest look at the Soweto Uprising, it did not achieve much in the short term, but produced more martyrs for the struggle. But in the long term, it changed everything. The Soweto Uprising was the best thing that happened to the ANC and in Carter, but the worst thing for the apartheid government, BCM and PAC. Why? Well, in the ANC's case, it was because after the uprising, thousands of young black South Africans fled the country to join their armed wing, Umkhonto weSizwe, which had previously been plagued by a lack of recruits and domestic support. These young new recruits had been inspired by the Black Conscious movement, and they realized the only way to fight apartheid was through the exiled ANC. With the destruction of the BCM and all its 19 organizations, many of their surviving members joined the ANC. But the uprising also revealed a massive threat to the ANC. It showed just how much it was getting eclipsed by its black political rivals, a threat that would become very relevant in the coming years. The uprising also triggered a huge increase in support for the Zulu Cultural Organization in Carter. Chief Buthelezzi's belief in non-violence was shared by many moderates who were horrified at the bloodshed of the uprising, who all saw in Carter as an organization with more clearer and reachable political goals. Also, thanks to the destruction of the BCM, many Zulus had been a part of it flocked to join in Carter. Its membership continued to rapidly grow. When it was founded, Carter had 30,000 members. In 1977, it had 150,000. In 79, 300,000. And in the mid-80s, it would reach 1 million. Though the movement that arguably suffered the most was the Black Conscious movement. It had been devastated by government crackdowns, and after it was banned on Black Wednesday, it ceased to be a dominant force in the country. Although, in 1979, the surviving members of the Black Conscious movement would regroup to form AZAPO, the Azanian People's Organization. AZAPO, although a shadow of what the BCM once was, would remain very strong in Soweto and the Eastern Cape. In the PAC's case, the uprising had showed how much its ability to fight its own armed struggle had been diminished, and as the ANC recruited almost all the new exiles, the PAC was now permanently sidelined. As the 1970s drew on, it became clear to many Afrikaner elites that the apartheid system would not work in the long term, and the system would have to be reformed, and a new strategy and philosophy would have to be developed. In 1978, South African President John Vorster would step down and would be replaced by P.W. Botha. Botha would develop a new strategy to deal with the pressure that South Africa was now under, and this strategy became known as total onslaught. To the National Party, they correctly felt that South Africa was facing down the might of communism by itself, and that South Africa was besieged on all sides by communists and black nationalists, and that they had been abandoned by their Western allies. So to deal with this total onslaught against South Africa, Botha and the National Party began to prepare South Africa for the battle to come. South Africa and Rhodesia were the last two countries in Africa ruled by whites, and Rhodesia was barely holding on, as its leaders had already begun negotiating. It was clear that once Rhodesia fell, the eyes of the world would all turn on South Africa, and with the war on the borders intensifying, it was only a matter of time until South Africa was completely surrounded by hostile communists, all heavily backed by the Soviet bloc in Cuba. The National Party under Botha began reforming South Africa. White South African, and particularly Afrikaner society, was rapidly militarized, and shadowy organizations like the Security Branch, CCB, and National Intelligence Service would gain ever more control of society. The apartheid government knew that the next decade, the 1980s, would be a fight for the very existence of its regime.